Sensible Hysteria. Book 1, Kappa La Verte. Intermission, The Rift of the Cause.
Now, dear listeners, as we pause to reflect on the grim tale thus far, I ask you, how does one measure the weight of a life lost to ambition? How do we reckon with the indifference of those who have long since become dust, who walk their paths with disregard for the souls crushed beneath their heels? I have studied these events, unearthed them from the ruins of time itself, and though I was not there to witness the blood spilled upon the decks of the henhouse, I know well the shape of the destruction left in its wake. The heist, if such a brutal event can still bear that name, was not simply a robbery, nor a daring act of rebellion. It was a statement, a declaration that power was the only currency that mattered. Those who claimed victory did so not with precision or cunning alone, but with the careless hands of those who had never been taught to value the lives of others. In the accounts I have recovered, there is no mourning, no hesitation. Only the cold calculus of those who saw themselves as the future and deemed others unworthy of a place in it. But to understand such a thing, one must first understand the city itself. Ulduvai, the greatest of the Shori flying cities, was a world divided not by walls, nor by mere social class, but by the very air itself. 4 floating cores, each orbiting the first core, the grandest and oldest of them all, formed a city unlike any that had come before or after. It was the very pinnacle of Shori civilization, the embodiment of their genius and their arrogance alike. But for all its splendor, Ulduvai was not an empire of equals. It was a hierarchy made manifest in architecture. The first core, or the throne above all, was where power lived. It was a place of spires and towers, of bridges that arced between impossible heights, of floating gardens that bloomed with flora from plains beyond this one. Its people, the chosen few, walked its streets with the confidence of those who believed they were meant to rule. Wealth was expected, tradition was law, and though corruption festered beneath the marble and gold, it was veiled in the illusion of order. To live in the first core was to believe in the divine right of progress. Its citizens, whether scholars, merchants, or aristocrats, all saw themselves as stewards of civilization itself. Even crime in the first core had an air of refinement. Duels settled disputes, assassinations were silent and efficient, and even thieves knew to dress the part of nobility. Life was valuable here, not for its inherent worth, but because it was an investment. The people of the first core understood that death, when it came, should at least serve a purpose. It was in this world that the henhouse stood, a floating palace of wealth and indulgence, where fortunes were won and lost, and where the city's elite gambled not only their gold, but their reputations. That was before the ship burned, before it was sent crashing to the depths below. And those responsible? They did not belong to the first core. No, they came from elsewhere. To descend to the second core was to leave behind the illusion of grandeur and step into something harsher, more raw. Here, buildings still stretched toward the sky, but they did so in a tangled sprawl, their structures more practical than beautiful. Streets were narrower, more crowded, and though the people here still lived above the world below, they were keenly aware of their position beneath the first core. The second core was a place of industry, of laborers and inventors, of those who made the empire function but were rarely recognized for their efforts. Life in the second core was not a matter of status, but survival. The people here fought for what they had, whether through coin, muscle, or cunning. And it was in this crucible that Aang, Koga, and Brand were forged. They were not born into the privilege of the first core. They did not inherit power or influence. No, they had to carve out their place with whatever tools were at their disposal. And in the second core, That meant learning that life was cheap. It meant understanding that to hesitate was to lose, and that mercy was often nothing more than another word for weakness. So, when they took the hen house, when they sent it plummeting from the sky with the lives of dozens still aboard, they did not weep. They did not regret. To them, those lives had already been spent the moment they stood in the way. If you think the destruction of the hen house was their greatest crime, then you have not been listening closely enough. That was but a single act, a test of their audacity, a mere opening move in a much larger game. What Aang, Koga, and Brand would do next would make the fall of the hen house seem like a mere spark before the wildfire. Their actions would stretch beyond simple robbery, beyond ambition, into something darker, something that would shake the very foundations of the empire they had been born beneath. And as I recount what comes next, you will see, dear listeners, that the weight of history is not measured in gold, nor in power, but in the lives spent to claim it.
Chapter 5. Scorched Secrets.
In the dim, forgotten sanctuary of the Broken Wing, Damas Barlays sits at the battered counter, his gaze haunted by memories, and his fingers nervously tracing the worn wood. His eyes, heavy with worry, flit between the empty bar and the ticking silence that fills the space.
Grom.
Damas begins in a strained whisper, the words nearly lost in the low murmur of the night.
What news of the hen house? The boy, did he hold his ground as I commanded?
His voice trembles with anxious anticipation, each syllable imbued with the burden of risk and regret. Grom, his expression stoic despite the gravity of their plight, responds in a measured tone that barely rises above the distant rumble of unrest.
We'll know soon enough, Damas. He's out there, watching everything. The boy's our eyes in this scorched city.
For a long, waited moment, silence descends upon them, a silence thick with the echoes of old tragedies. Then, with a voice laden with both sorrow and suspicion, Damas leans closer, as if to confide a dangerous truth.
Do you remember the fires that tore through this city 5 years past? The Ember God, once the proud souls who battled the Inferno, were dissolved in the aftermath. That conflagration, it wasn't mere misfortune. It felt as if our very fate was being rewritten in flames.
His tone falters, the memories surfacing like ghosts among the ashes of time. Grom's eyes, dark and unyielding, meet Damas's troubled stare.
I remember, Damas. The city was swallowed by fire, and in its wake, the Ember God disintegrated, leaving us to survive in a world suddenly cold and ruthless.
Damas's voice grows more urgent, his words edged with a dangerous curiosity.
I've been wondering. I suspect there were forces at play, a hidden hand determined to reshape our destiny. I've begun to suspect who might be behind it all.
His speculation hangs in the air, a confession that trembles on the brink of revelation. Before he can complete his thought, the door bursts open with a jarring crash. The sudden intrusion cuts his words short, scattering his secret like so many embers into the night. A sudden burst of exhilaration shatters the tense silence of the Broken Wing. The door flies open as Brand, Koga, and Aang surge into the bar, their faces alight with unbridled joy. Their steps are buoyant, their voices a chorus of triumphant laughter, a stark contrast to the somber recollections that once filled the air.
We did it!
Brand exclaims, his tone ringing with pride and relief. Koga's ever-shifting disguise seems to shimmer in the low light as he offers a sly, knowing grin, while Aang's measured demeanor cracks into a rare, genuine smile. They've secured the soul contracts, priceless documents that promise power and the freedom to revel as long as one lives. The trio's energy is infectious. They're here to eat, drink, and be merry, celebrating the successful completion of the first part of the job. Damas, who had been steeped in anxious recollection moments before, now leans forward eagerly at the battered counter.
Show me the contracts.
He demands, his voice rising above the jubilant din. Bran steps forward and retrieves a sleek, waterproof case from beneath his vibrant jacket. With a deliberate flourish, he opens it to reveal the coveted soul contracts, each one a sealed promise of dark power and unspoken potential. Damas's eyes widen as he inspects the documents, the weight of their significance, and the palpable thrill of victory igniting a spark within him. A slow smile spreads across Damas's face, the tension of earlier hours melting into the warm glow of celebration.
By the fires of old, you've done well,
He declares, his tone a blend of admiration and relief. In that moment, the Broken Wing transforms from a den of whispered regrets into a sanctuary of revelry. For hours that stretch into the deep blue of night and beyond, the bar fills with laughter, clinking glasses, and the murmur of shared triumph. The celebration continues unabated until the first light of dawn creeps over the horizon, an emblem of hope, rebirth, and the promise of further adventures yet to come. Morning light spills weakly through grimy windows, cutting through the haze of revelry that still clings to the Broken Wing. The revelry of the night before has left its mark. Brand, Koga, and Aang lie in disheveled heaps around the bar, their laughter now replaced by the soft snores of exhaustion. Damas Barlays, ever the embodiment of sober resolve, moves through the room with determined urgency. His eyes, still gleaming with the triumph of the previous night's victory, now harden with the weight of what lies ahead. Approaching the trio with a measured, commanding tone, he rouses them from their slumber.
Rise and shine.
He intones, his voice low and resolute.
Our celebration is over. Tonight we take the next step.
He pauses, letting the gravity of his words sink in.
We need to get a contract signed, in blood.
Without missing a beat, Damas reaches beneath the counter and pulls out a leather-bound case. With a flourish that belies the severity of the task, he opens it to reveal a single, meticulously prepared contract. His finger traces the embossed lettering with reverence.
This here
Damas declares, his tone both somber and determined.
belongs to Norith Stonecall, Vice Warden of the Maximum Security Prison. Her authority and the contracts she holds are coveted by many, but none as daring as those who dare to challenge fate.
He glances at his companions, their eyes now awake and alert, the remnants of last night's indulgences vanishing before the magnitude of the plan. Damas continues, his voice steady and filled with the promise of both peril and reward.
To transfer ownership to me, we need her thumbprint and her own blood on this document. It's not merely ink and paper. It's a covenant sealed with the ultimate price. Tonight, we strike at the heart of power, and by doing so, we rewrite the rules of the game.
The air in the Broken Wing grows heavy with anticipation, as each word from Damas resonates with the gravity of the task ahead. The contract gleams under the weak morning light, a silent herald of the dangerous gambit to come. The next phase of their plan looms large, a perilous dance with destiny, where victory is only for those willing to risk it all. Aang, still rubbing the exhaustion from his eyes, blinks at Damas, his brow furrowed.
And how exactly are we supposed to get her bloody thumbprint?
His voice is low, wary, pragmatic as always.
We're talking about the Vice Warden of a maximum security prison, not some street-level crook. She's not just going to let us press her thumb onto a piece of paper.
Koga, who had been stretching the stiffness from his shoulders, lets out a quiet scoff.
Simple.
He says with a lazy wave of his hand.
We force her. A quick knife, a little persuasion, and she'll be signing it before she even knows what hit her.
Bran Nightshade chuckles, still sprawled lazily in his seat, his colorful coat draped over his shoulders.
Always so brutish, Koga.
He muses, running a hand through his stark white hair.
Seduction is a much better tool than force. A well-placed whisper, the right drink, a gentle touch. People give up their blood for far less.
Damas lets their words hang in the air for a moment before clapping his hands together, drawing their attention back to him. His sharp grin returns, filled with the same smooth confidence that had carried them through the heist.
Boys, no need to fret about the details just yet. We'll figure it out, because all 4 of us are going to Heaven's Loft tonight.
A shift ripples through the group at the name. Heaven's Loft, the most exclusive nightclub in the city, where the powerful and the damned dance beneath golden lights and velvet curtains. It's a den of indulgence, secrecy, and vice. Damas leans against the counter, his smile widening.
That just so happens to be North Stone Cold's favorite haunt. She'll be there, drinking and reveling in the excess of the city's elite. And us, we'll be there too, making sure this contract gets sealed.
He raps his knuckles against the waterproof case still sitting on the bar. One way or another, the mood in the room shifts from sluggish recovery to razor-sharp focus. Last night had been a victory, but tonight would be a game of finesse, deception, and risk. The real job had only just begun.
Chapter 6. Neon Veins of the Night.
In the midst of the neon haze, 4 figures emerge. Damas Barlays, Ang Blackthorn, Bran Nightshade, and the ever-mysterious Koga 1000 Faces. Their silhouettes merge with the swirling patterns of colored light as they step into Heaven's Loft, a venue where the energy is as palpable as the mystery that clings to every corner. The Heaven's Loft pulsed with life, a temple of excess and movement where the night was eternal and the rhythm never ceased. A massive dance floor dominated the center of the club, a sea of bodies shifting and swaying beneath shifting strobes and cascading neon beams. The floor was a shimmering black lacquer that reflected the colored lights, making it look like dancers were gliding across a rippling pool of molten color. To the left, a grand stage for live performances loomed, framed by twisting silver pillars and draped in velvet curtains that were drawn back to reveal a DJ perched above the madness. The sound system was a monstrous construct, sending waves of bass through the very bones of the building, vibrating through skin and skull alike. On certain nights, live bands took over, filling the club with electric guitar riffs and wailing synths. But tonight, the relentless beat of disco and electronic fusion ruled supreme. Flanking the dance floor were 2 fully stocked bars, one at the front of the club and one tucked into the back, ensuring no guest had to stray too far from their indulgence of choice. The shelves glowed with an endless array of liquor bottles, each filled with amber, crimson, and sapphire-colored elixirs. Bartenders worked with fluid precision, shaking, stirring, and pouring drinks with effortless charm, their movements as much a part of the spectacle as the dancers themselves. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, alcohol, and a faint trace of something floral, perfume, or something more illicit, depending on who you asked. Laughter, shouts, and the occasional crash of a dropped glass blended into the ever-present music, making it difficult to discern individual conversations unless one was close enough to lean in. Damas Barlays stood just past the entrance, his sharp eyes scanning the pulsating chaos of Heaven's Loft. The music was deafening, a steady thrum of bass that rattled bones and made conversation a challenge. Still, he leaned in close to his crew and barked his orders over the pounding beat.
Split up, find the mark, !
His voice was clear, clipped, all business. He turned his head slightly, narrowing his gaze at Koga.
And I mean it. North needs to be alive, got it?
Koga, arms crossed, let out an exaggerated sigh, his many faces twisting in exasperation.
Yeah, alive. What do you take me for?
Damas held his stare for an extra second before giving a curt nod.
Then let's move.
Without another word, the group dissolved into the neon jungle of the club. Bran sauntered over to the front bar, slipping between clusters of drunken partygoers, The kind of people who lived for nights like these, nights they wouldn't remember come morning. He reached the bar, tapped the counter, and leaned in with his usual casual charm.
Barkeep, give me the loudest, most obnoxious drink you can make. Surprise me.
The bartender, a bored-looking man in a tight shirt and suspenders, smirked. A few moments later, Brand found himself holding a neon blue monstrosity in a glass as wide as his head, rimmed with sugar and decorated with an entire fruit arrangement and a sparking firework. Brand laughed, clearly delighted.
Perfect. Just what I was in the mood for.
Still a bit salty from Damas's very pointed reminder about keeping Norith alive, Koga made his way toward the back bar, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off irritation. The back of the club was darker, the music a fraction quieter, the crowd less dense but more intense. These were the people who didn't come here just to dance. They came to make deals, drown in vices, or disappear. Koga took a seat at the bar, drumming his fingers on the counter.
Whiskey. Neat.
As the bartender poured, Koga scanned the room. His mind split between looking for Norith and wondering just how much trouble he'd get into if he accidentally ignored Damas's request to keep the guy breathing. The pulse of heaven's loft was relentless, an electric rhythm thrumming through every body on the floor. Aang wove through the crowd, his sharp eyes scanning for any sign of Norith's stone call, until his gaze locked with hers. Across the dance floor, standing tall and poised beneath the flashing strobes, was a Derhi woman, a striking figure of grace and power. Her large, bird-like wings caught the shifting neon lights, feathers shimmering with hints of sapphire and violet. She was dressed in a sparkling blue gown, sleek and form-fitting, that shimmered like water rippling under the moon. But it wasn't just the way she looked. It was the way she held herself. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something silent passed between them. A challenge, an invitation, a promise. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She stepped forward, extended a hand, and tilted her head in a silent question. Aang smirked.
I thought you'd never ask.
As soon as he took her hand, the world around them seemed to fade, the chaotic sea of dancers parting like a stage opening for a performance. The first step was slow, measured, a deliberate press of his foot forward as she stepped back in perfect synchrony. The next was sharp, a snap of movement, their bodies drawing close as if magnetized. Aang led with confidence, his grip firm but respectful. The Derhi followed with fluid ease, her powerful frame moving with feline grace. They twisted and turned in a clash of tension and elegance, every motion infused with meaning. She spun, her wings flaring as she arched her back, giving the illusion of flight before Aang caught her waist and pulled her back in. The music surged, a dramatic dip, her body bending like a blade, Aang holding her low before snapping her upright with effortless control. Their steps grew faster, a battle of dominance disguised as dance, their movements an unspoken dialogue. She challenged him with a sharp turn, a flick of her feathers sending a gust of air against his cheek. Aang countered, his leg sweeping between hers in a teasing, near miss of a step, his smirk unwavering. Their breathing synchronized. Their bodies moved as one. The crowd had noticed. Whistles, cheers, a growing energy. But to Aang and the Derhi woman, it didn't matter. The only thing that existed was the beat, the heat, and the unrelenting pull between them. With one last powerful step, Aang twisted her into a final spin, sending the shimmering blue of her dress flaring out like an ocean wave before catching her against his chest. Their faces were close, so close that he could feel her breath against his lips. For a moment, the world held still. Then the music ended. The crowd erupted, applause, shouts. The energy of the room was electric. Still holding her, Aang raised an eyebrow.
So, was that a dance, or were we just fighting with rhythm?
The dairy woman let out a soft, knowing chuckle. Then, without a word, she leaned in, closer, closer, until her beak brushed the edge of his jaw, and then she slipped away into the crowd, leaving him standing alone. Aang exhaled, still caught in the moment. He chuckled to himself and ran a hand through his hair.
Well,
He muttered.
that was something.
Dama slid into the private booth, his movements smooth and deliberate. The velvet curtain swayed slightly behind him, cutting off the flashing lights and wild energy of Heaven's Loft, leaving only the low hum of the bass vibrating through the walls. Across from him sat the Sheer, a man wrapped in shadow, even under the neon glow. His presence was unmistakable, though his features remained obscured by the dim lighting and the sickly green tint of the under-table glow. A drug kingpin by trade, the Sheer's influence stretched far beyond illicit substances. There were whispers of something darker, necromancy, secrets woven into death itself. The air between them was thick, layered with unspoken deals, unseen histories, and the kind of tension only men of power carried. Damas leaned back, unbuttoning his coat just enough to show he was comfortable, but not careless. He exhaled, a slow, measured breath, before speaking.
Let's talk about the project.
The Sheer's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, but a recognition of the weight behind the words. His long, ringed fingers tapped against the table in a rhythmic, almost thoughtful pattern. Brand leaned back against the bar, still buzzing from the infectious energy of the dance floor. The neon lights painted the world in shifting hues of blue, pink, and gold, and for a moment, he let himself sink into the thrill of it all. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he spotted her, a brunette dwarf, sitting alone on the bench beside him. She was gorgeous in that effortlessly cool way, with sharp eyes and a casual air that suggested she was both exhausted and in need of a good time. Never one to miss an opportunity, Brand turned toward her, flashing a lazy grin.
Hell of a scene out there, huh?
He said, gesturing toward the dance floor. Then, lifting his ridiculous neon blue monstrosity of a drink, he added,
Almost as wild as this disaster I'm drinking.
The dwarf woman let out a soft chuckle, eyeing his drink with amusement.
Yeah, you look like you've made some questionable life choices tonight.
She teased. Then she sighed, leaning back against the bench.
But honestly, I could use a little chaos. Work's been, well, work.
Brand tilted his head, feigning deep interest.
Ah, work woes. Tragic. What kind of soul-crushing profession keeps a woman like you from enjoying a night like this?
She rolled her eyes, though the corners of her lips twitched in amusement.
Boss troubles.
She admitted.
Real piece of work. You know how it is. Some people just can't sit still. They're loud. They never lose energy. And they act like the whole world runs on their time.
Brand raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of his absurdly garnished drink.
Sounds exhausting.
He mused. Then, nodding toward the dance floor, where a certain winged Derhi woman had just finished a rather intimate tango with Aang, he smirked.
By any chance, is your boss one of them?
The dwarf woman let out a dry laugh, shaking her head.
Bingo! But he is not here. Also, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with the Derhi. They are just extra.
Brand grinned, swirling his drink.
Yeah, I've been watching that one out there. Seems like the type to keep people running circles around them. I take it your boss isn't much different.
Not at all.
She said, rubbing her temple.
But hey, at least I'm getting paid. I guess that counts for something.
Brand lifted his glass.
To getting paid then, and to making terrible decisions in the name of blowing off steam.
She smirked, clinking her own glass against his.
I'll drink to that.
There was a pause, a beat in the conversation that stretched just long enough to feel natural. Then she glanced back at him, as if suddenly realizing something.
By the way,
she said, offering a hand.
name's Norith. Norith Stonecall.
Brand didn't let the flicker of recognition show on his face. Instead, he kept his easy grin, shaking her hand like any other casual encounter.
Bran Nightshade.
He replied smoothly.
Pleasure's all mine.
Chapter 7. The Dance of Bullets and Bloodstains.
Koga sat at the back bar, the dim light barely catching the deep scowl etched across his features. He had been here far too long trying to shake off his annoyance, but it was impossible with the chaos of the night still fresh. Aang, as usual, had a knack for drawing attention to himself with his carefree movements and those damn playful grins. Koga ground his teeth as he mulled over the situation. They hadn't even found their mark yet, and already things were slipping out of control.
Great.
He muttered under his breath, swirling the whiskey in his glass.
Just great. Can't even get a quiet drink in this madhouse.
The music pulsed around him, adding to his growing irritation, when suddenly the door to the club crashed open. A figure entered that immediately drew the attention of everyone in the room. It was a gray-skinned elf, clad in black, the red gleam of his eyes flashing under the neon lights. His presence was like an oppressive storm cloud. Koga's gut tightened. The same elf from the night before. The one who'd been guarding the safe. The one we fought and could barely lay a finger on with all three of us. But now, there was something different about him. He looked disheveled, as though he had been in a fight, his usual poise replaced by a frantic, almost unhinged energy. He was out for blood. Koga instinctively leaned back into the shadows, trying to make himself as nondescript as possible. He didn't want to attract the elf's attention, especially not now. The last thing he needed was a confrontation when they still hadn't even laid their hands on their mark. His fingers tightened around his drink, but he kept his face neutral, staring into the amber liquid as the elf stalked toward the dance floor. The elf's movements were stiff, like someone driven by a singular ferocious purpose, and Koga's eyes narrowed in curiosity. As the elf moved through the crowded floor, Koga couldn't help but notice. He wasn't alone. Something was leading him. Koga squinted, leaning forward slightly to get a better look. His heart skipped a beat as the object came into clearer view. It was the same clown doll from the night before, the one Mr. Twaddle had handed them. But this time, it wasn't sitting in a box. No, it was moving, floating, eerily leading the elf by some invisible tether, its painted grin frozen in a grotesque imitation of joy. The elf's hands twitched as he followed it, his pace quickening, his eyes focused on the doll with unsettling intensity. How the hell did he find us? They were on Third Corps now, high above the depths of Olduvai, in a completely different part of the city. Heaven's Loft wasn't just some hole-in-the-wall club. It was an entirely different scene from where they last saw this bastard. The elf, he was supposed to be guarding a vault last night, not tracking them across the city like a bloodhound. And yet, here he was.
That's impossible.
Koga's mind raced, his many faces twisting in thought. The elf wasn't just looking for a fight. His stance, his expression, the way he clutched his revolver like it was an extension of his own hatred. This wasn't a search. This was an execution. His execution. Koga swallowed hard, shrinking further into the shadows of the bar, his fingers tightening around the glass in front of him. The elf had nearly killed him, Aang and Brand, last night. They barely got away. And now he was here, completely dissolved. Feral, his movements stiffer, sharper, his entire being consumed by the hunt. And then, it clicked. The clown doll. Koga's stomach dropped. His mind replayed the events of the night before. Mr. Twaddle, his playful grin, the strange warning.
To make tonight more fun, but be careful what you feed it.
The doll was his now. He had given it gold, tossing a casual coin its way when he first got it. Just a joke, a meaningless gesture. But what if it wasn't? Magic could do a lot of things in Ulduvai, and binding was one of them. If that damn doll was connected to him now, then anyone with the right kind of pull, like a vengeful, obsessed killer, could use it as a beacon. The elf wasn't tracking Aang. He wasn't tracking Brand. He was tracking him. Koga clenched his jaw, forcing himself to breathe evenly as the elf continued stalking forward, pushing past sweating dancers and wide-eyed clubgoers. He was getting closer. The realization sent a cold shiver down Koga's spine. He was not getting out of here without blood being spilled. Koga's breath hitched, the meaning dawning on him. The clown doll wasn't just some playful trinket. It was something controlling the elf, guiding his every step. Koga barely had time to process his revelation before the red-eyed elf's gaze snapped to him. For a moment, the world stood still. The lights of heaven's loft pulsed, the music pounded, but all Koga could focus on were those rage-filled crimson eyes locking onto him like a predator spotting its wounded prey. Then, the revolver was in the elf's hand.
You cost me my job.
The elf roared over the music, his voice raw with fury. The clubgoers nearby flinched, some stumbling away, but the chaos of the dance floor swallowed most of their panic. The clown doll suddenly twitched to life and launched itself at Koga, its painted grin seeming to widen as it lunged forward, arms outstretched. Koga reacted on instinct. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he sent a cascade of illusions spinning through the air. A dozen mirror images of himself scattered across the dance floor in a blur of motion, each one moving just slightly off sync from the others. The real Koga ducked low, diving to the side just as the first gunshot cracked through the club. Bang! The bullet grazed his shoulder, a hot streak of pain cutting through him as he rolled onto the floor. But the elf wasn't just shooting at him. He was shooting at everything. Bang! 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 The next shot missed Koga completely, but hit a dancer mid-spin. The man let out a strangled gasp as blood sprayed across the flashing neon floor. Screams erupted. Bang! A woman at the bar collapsed, clutching her stomach as she toppled off her stool. Bang! Another round tore through a waiter's leg, sending him sprawling into a table of drinks, glass shattering, liquor spilling. The elf had lost all control, and still the clown doll scuttled toward Koga, its tiny, painted hands twitching with unnatural hunger. Koga hissed in pain, pressing a hand against his bleeding shoulder as he scrambled backward, his illusions flickering from the sheer strain of keeping them up through the injury. The club had finally erupted into full panic, people stampeding for the exits, tables overturned, chairs kicked aside. The red-eyed elf snarled, his revolver clicking empty, but his shaking hands were already reloading, eyes wild.
Give her it back.
He bellowed, spittle flying from his mouth.
Where is she? What did you do?
Koga gritted his teeth, blinking sweat from his eyes. Harriet. What the hell was he talking about? Koga had nothing to do with her. Hell, if anything, Brand was the one dealing with that particular brand of insanity. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was getting the hell out of here before the elf reloaded. The chaos in Heaven's Loft had reached a fever pitch. Screams mixed with the pounding bass, glass shattered under the stampede of fleeing patrons, and amidst it all, the red-eyed elf stood with murder in his eyes, his revolver still smoking as he scrambled to reload. Then, a voice boomed over the mayhem.
Slef, put the gun down, now!
A portly man in a black suit pushed through the panicked crowd, a revolver drawn in steady hands. His presence, authoritative, controlled, was the kind that made even the most hardened criminals hesitate. An off-duty detective. But the stampede of clubgoers had turned into an unstoppable force, their desperate flight pushing between him and the elf. The detective was swept away in the human tide, lost to the sheer mass of bodies trying to escape the nightclub-turned-war zone. The red-eyed elf, now unchallenged, snapped the cylinder of his revolver shut and turned his furious gaze back toward Koga. Meanwhile, on the dance floor, Aang had barely caught his breath from his tango when the first gunshots rang out. His instincts kicked in as his fists tightened.
Oh, for the love of... he muttered.
The Derhi woman in the sparkling blue dress, his dance partner, had also noticed. Her sharp eyes flicked toward the chaos, nostrils flaring, wings twitching with tension. Then, she turned to him with a wolfish grin.
Don't worry, future mate. I will protect you.
Before Aang could process what she'd just said, she lunged forward, grabbed him with terrifying ease, and tossed him over her shoulder like a sack of flour.
Oh, hold on, I can...
Aang yelped, kicking slightly as he dangled upside down, arms flailing. He reflexively reached for dignity, though at this point it was far, far out of reach.
I can walk, you know.
He protested.
Yes, but you'll be safer like this, future mate.
She said with a laugh, striding confidently toward the exit, her wings spread to shield them from the crowd as she moved through the chaos like a force of nature. Aang groaned, running a hand through his hair as he awkwardly adjusted his upside-down position. He muttered,
I am trying to be a gentleman, and this is what I get.
As they neared the exit, Aang shot one last look over his shoulder at the carnage unfolding inside Heaven's Loft. The red-eyed elf was still standing, still firing, and Koga looked like he was caught between surviving and absolutely losing his patience.
You know,
Aang muttered to himself.
I feel like the guys are going to need some help.
Brand was an opportunist, an artist of improvisation, and right now, as gunshots rang out across Heaven's Loft and the club-goers descended into sheer chaos, he saw an opportunity. And as always, he was going to make it look like an accident. He turned back to North Stonecall, the brunette dwarf who had, up until this moment, been flirting with him while complaining about her boss. She was still seated, oblivious to the immediate danger, swirling the drink in her hand and raising an eyebrow at Brand as people tripped over themselves, running for the exits.
Should we be worried about that?
She asked, nodding toward the gunfire. Brand took a long, dramatic sip of his ridiculous neon blue monstrosity of a drink before responding.
Nah,
He said, completely deadpan.
You'd be surprised how often this happens around me.
North snorted, shaking her head.
You must go to some terrible bars.
Oh, you have no idea.
Brand replied smoothly, setting his drink down. That's when the first accident happened. Brand moved to shift closer, elbow propped on the table, but his sleeve caught on his oversized drink. The neon blue monstrosity tipped over. The liquid waterfall was magnificent. The garish drink splashed all over Norith's lap, her expensive-looking pants soaked in glowing blue alcohol. The firework that had been sticking out of the drink, still faintly sparking, bounced off the table and landed right between them. Norith yelped, her immediate flirty demeanor replaced with sheer frustration.
Oh, come on!
She groaned, instinctively jerking backward, legs flailing in an effort to shake off the drink. That's when the second accident happened. Her abrupt movement kicked the table, hard. So hard that the plate of bar snacks sitting on the edge of it flipped into the air. A knife from the snack platter spun end over end, caught the light, and, in a truly poetic moment, landed blade first on Norith's forearm.
Ow, what the hell?
Norith shouted, clutching her arm as a thin line of red welled up where the knife had just barely cut her. Brand's eyes widened. Shit. He opened his mouth to apologize, but that's when the third accident happened. Still flustered, Norith tried to stand up, but her foot caught on a fallen bar stool. She tripped. Brand, ever the gentleman, instinctively reached out to steady her. Except, in her panic, she had also reached blindly for the table, and in a cruel twist of fate, her bloody hand slammed down onto a nearby document. The paper stuck to her palm before peeling away, leaving behind a clear, bloody fingerprint stain right on the contract Brand needed. For a moment, the two of them just stared at the document, Brand's brain racing to catch up with what had just transpired. Finally, he let out a low whistle.
Well,
He said.
that sure happened.
North glared at him.
You absolute disaster of a man.
Brand raised his hands, barely holding back laughter.
Okay, in my defense, most of that wasn't my fault.
You threw a knife at me?
No, that was gravity. I respect gravity. It does what it wants.
North, still fuming, swiped blindly for a napkin, dabbing at her bleeding arm as Brand very subtly reached for the bloodstained document and slid it off the table like nothing had happened.
See?
He said with a grin.
I told you, nothing to worry about.
Another gunshot rang out across the club. North turned alarmed.
Okay, maybe we should go.
Brand, tucking the contract under his jacket, smiled.
I think that's an excellent idea.
Koga barely had time to react before Red-Eyed Elf's revolver cracked again. Bang! Pain exploded in his leg. His knee buckled, and he hit the floor hard, his vision flashing white as searing agony shot up through his body. He barely registered the scream of another innocent bystander, another unlucky soul caught in the elf's blind rage. This was bad. This was really bad. The red-eyed elf had reloaded. He wasn't stopping. Koga sucked in a sharp breath and forced himself to move, dragging himself up despite the red-hot burn in his leg. He had one shot at getting out of here alive. He staggered toward the exit, whispering arcane words under his breath. Magic crackled in the air around him, twisting and bending the light. The moment he burst onto the streets of Third Corps, 4 more Kogas split off from him, each one a perfect illusion, each one running in a different direction. The red-eyed elf roared behind him, spotting all 5 of them at once. The gamble was simple. If that bastard doesn't know which one was real, he'd waste time chasing a phantom. Koga didn't stop to look back. He limped as fast as he could, forcing his wounded leg to move, gritting his teeth as he hobbled forward, each painful step driving another surge of adrenaline into his veins. He didn't dare check if the clown doll was still with the red-eyed elf. He just prayed that whatever force had bound the damn thing to him had been broken in the chaos. Because if it wasn't, then Red-Eyed Elf would never stop coming.
Skyborn kingdom built on high, but rust and ruin stain the sky. Chains are breaking, ghosts arise, whispers carve through shattered minds. Watch the fall, hear the cries. Truth is lost and it'll divide.